My name is Alara Thorne, and for most of my 40-odd years, I've lived a life painted in the subtle hues of the coast, here in our little town of Port Blossom. I'm a painter of watercolors, mostly seascapes and the shifting moods of the sky, a profession that, much like my temperament, favors quiet observation over bold pronouncements. My world has always been small, revolving around the gentle rhythm of the tides, the scent of salt and wild roses that perfumes our cottage garden, and above all, my daughter, Lyra. Lyra, she's the vibrant splash of color in my muted world, a girl woven from sunlight and quiet determination. At 17, she possessed an artist's soul like mine, but with a pragmatist's ambition. Her dream wasn't of easels and palettes, but of words and histories, of the hallowed halls of Kingswood University, nestled inland amidst ancient oaks and whispered scholarship. For 2 years, she'd poured herself into her studies with a singular focus, her light often burning late into the night, the soft scratch of her pen a familiar lullaby in our small home. The Chancellor's Beacon Award at Kingswood was more than a scholarship, it was a lifeline, the only bridge across the chasm of our modest means to the future she so fiercely desired. The day the acceptance letter arrived, thick and embossed with the university crest, a rare, unrestrained joy had filled our cottage. Lyra hadn't screamed or jumped. She'd simply held the letter to her chest, her eyes luminous with unshed tears, a silent testament to every sacrificed weekend, every early morning. "I did it, Mama," she'd whispered, and in those 3 words, I heard the culmination of 1,000 quiet efforts. We'd celebrated with Earl Grey tea and my grandmother's lemon biscuits, the late afternoon sun slanting through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing like tiny, triumphant stars. It felt like the beginning of everything. I suppose, in a way, it was just not the beginning we'd envisioned. A week later, another envelope arrived from Kingswood. This one was slender, almost apologetic in its plainness. I'd been tending the roses, their velvet petals still damp with morning dew, and I'd found it tucked in our mailbox. Thinking it was some mundane follow-up, a housing questionnaire, perhaps, or details about orientation, I'd placed it on the kitchen table where Lyra was sketching, the scent of graphite and tea mingling in the air. "More post from Kingswood, darling," I'd said, turning to put the kettle on. She picked it up, her brow furrowed slightly. I remember the kettle beginning to whistle, a cheerful sound that would soon feel incongruous. Lyra didn't speak. The silence stretched, thin and tight, until it was punctuated by a small, choked sound. I turned, the whistling kettle suddenly fading into the background. She was staring at the single sheet of paper, her face utterly devoid of color, her hand trembling so violently the paper rattled. "Lyra? What is it, sweet girl?" She couldn't seem to form words, just lifted a shaking hand and offered me the letter. I took it, my heart beginning a slow, uneasy thrum against my ribs. The typed words were stark, impersonal. "Dear Ms. Lyra Thorne, we acknowledge receipt of your formal declination of the Chancellor's Beacon Award. We understand that circumstances can change, and your place has now been offered to the next candidate on our waiting list. We wish you well in your future endeavors." I read it once, then twice. A laugh, dry and incredulous, escaped me. "Decline? But you didn't decline anything, did you?" I looked at her, searching her pale face for some explanation, any explanation that would make sense of the nonsensical words. Lyra shook her head, her eyes wide and already shimmering. "No," she whispered, her voice like fragile glass. "Mama, why would I do that? It's all I've ever wanted." Her bewilderment was so genuine, so absolute, it cut through my own. This wasn't a change of heart. This was an impossibility. Lyra, who had meticulously crafted every sentence of her application, who had double-checked every deadline, who had practically memorized the Kingswood University prospectus. Declining was as likely as the tide refusing to turn. My hand, steadier than I felt, reached for the telephone. "We need to call the university, Lyra." There's been a terrible mistake. As I dialed the number for the admissions office, the scent of the lemon biscuits, once a fragrance of celebration, now seemed to mock us from the counter. Lyra sat huddled at the table, her sketchpad forgotten, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. The cheerful hold music, a surprisingly jaunty classical piece, felt like an affront. Finally, a calm, professional voice answered. Kingswood University admissions, this is Ms. Albright, how may I help you? I explained, my voice carefully modulated, that we'd received a letter in error, stating Lyra had declined her scholarship. Ms. Albright listened patiently. May I have her applicant ID, please? I provided it, Lyra whispering the numbers to me. There was the distant clatter of a keyboard. I could almost feel Lyra holding her breath beside me. Yes, Miss Thorne, Ms. Albright said, her tone unchanged. According to our records, we received an email withdrawal from the applicant's registered email address on Tuesday last at 3:17 p.m. The request was processed accordingly, and as the letter states, the award has been reassigned. My throat tightened. I'm sorry, an email? From her registered address? That is correct, Ms. Albright confirmed. It was quite unequivocal. Are you saying she did not send this email? No, I said, my voice barely a whisper, looking at Lyra, whose eyes were now wide with a dawning, terrible understanding. No, she certainly did not. Could you perhaps read out that email address to me? I asked, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. Ms. Albright did. It was Lyra's primary email, the one she used for everything important. Lyra shook her head again, more vehemently this time, a silent scream in her eyes. I didn't, Mama. I never sent anything. I see, Ms. Albright said, though her voice conveyed little actual sight into our predicament. Well, if you believe there has been unauthorized access to her account, that is a serious matter. We can forward a copy of the withdrawal email to the registered address for your review. However, I must be clear, once an award of this nature is reassigned, it is exceptionally difficult to reverse the decision, especially if the new recipient has already accepted. Please, I managed, please forward it. The call ended with polite, unsatisfactory platitudes. We sat in the sudden silence of the kitchen, the ordinary sounds of the house, the ticking clock, a distant gull's cry, feeling amplified, intrusive. Lyra was no longer just pale, she looked fragile, as if a harsh word might shatter her. Someone, she said, her voice barely audible, someone pretended to be me. The forwarded email arrived in Lyra's inbox a few minutes later. It was brief, chillingly formal, and utterly convincing. To whom it may concern, due to unforeseen personal circumstances, I must respectfully decline the Chancellor's Beacon Award. I am grateful for the opportunity, but am no longer in a position to accept. Sincerely, Lyra Thorne. Sent from her email account. Timestamped, Tuesday, 3:17 p.m. Tuesday, Lyra breathed, her gaze fixed on the screen. That was the afternoon of the celebration tea and Vivian held for me. My blood ran cold. Vivian, my younger sister, and her daughter, Cassandra. They had hosted a small gathering at their home, a more lavish affair than our quiet cottage could manage, to celebrate Lyra's achievement. A knot of unease, vague and unwelcome, began to tighten in my chest. I pushed it down. It was too monstrous to contemplate. Think, Lyra, I urged gently. Your laptop, your phone. Did anyone else use them that afternoon? Lyra's eyes searched mine, then drifted to a point beyond my shoulder, her mind replaying the events of that day. Her brow was a landscape of concentration and dawning horror. My laptop, she whispered, her voice cracking. It was on the side table in the sunroom. Cassie asked if she could use it. She said she wanted to look up the lyrics to that song we were all humming, the one from the old movie. She paused, her breath catching. She was on it for a while. Maybe 10, 15 minutes. I didn't think anything of it. A profound silence descended, heavy with unspoken accusations and the sickening weight of betrayal. My quiet, gentle Lyra, who wouldn't harm a fly, who always saw the best in people. And Cassie, her cousin, her childhood confidant, who had shared giggles and secrets and dreams with her under this very roof. I looked at Lyra, her face a mask of disbelief and pain. "We need to check the laptop's history, darling," I said, my voice softer than I intended, trying to shield her from the implications I was already beginning to grasp. The path to understanding the full measure of what had happened was not a sudden, glaring revelation, but a slow, creeping dawn of sorrow. Waiting for the forwarded email from Kingswood had been an agony of suspense, each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall echoing the anxious beat of my own heart. Lyra sat beside me, pale and quiet, her usual vibrant energy dimmed, as if a vital light within her had been cruelly snuffed out. My mind, unbidden, drifted back through the years to my own childhood alongside Vivian. Sarah, as we called her then, was like a hummingbird, bright, quick, always drawing the eye. I was the sparrow, quieter, content in the shadows. Our parents, Helena and Richard, loved us both, I truly believe that, but their admiration for Sarah's sparkle was always more overt. If I achieved something, it was good, Alara, well done. If Sarah did, it was met with effusive praise, a sense of dazzling expectation fulfilled. I learned early to navigate this subtle imbalance, not with resentment, but with a quiet retreat into my own world of books and art, finding solace in the steady, unassuming beauty of the coast. We grew up, married, and had our daughters around the same time, Lyra and Cassandra. For a while, it felt as though our generation might mend the subtle fractures of the past. The girls were inseparable as children, their laughter a constant melody during shared holidays and summer afternoons spent exploring the rock pools at Port Blossom Cove. They built sandcastles, whispered secrets, and even, for a few years, attended the same small primary school. But the old patterns I began to see had a way of seeping through the cracks of time. Lyra was praised for her diligence, her kindness. Cassie, for her spirit, her charm. When Lyra stumbled, she was encouraged to try harder. When Cassie faltered, excuses were often found. She was sensitive, misunderstood, or simply bored by mundane expectations. The favoritism was rarely overt, more a gentle, persistent current that always seemed to flow in Vivian's and Cassie's direction. Both Lyra and Cassie had applied for the Chancellor's Beacon Award. It was a fiercely competitive, national scholarship. We all knew the odds were slim. Lyra had worked with quiet intensity, researching, writing, refining her essays until they shone with her unique voice. Cassie, from what Vivian had proudly relayed, had also put in a significant effort, though perhaps with more drama and declarations of her impending genius. When Lyra received her acceptance, her first thought, after the initial wave of joy, had been for Cassie. "What about Cassie, Mama?" she'd asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "Will she be terribly disappointed?" Such was Lyra's empathetic heart. A few days later, Cassie received her letter, waitlisted. Effectively a polite no, Vivian had sighed dramatically over the phone, though there was an edge to her voice I couldn't quite decipher at the time. The celebration tea at Vivian's had been Lyra's idea, a way to include Cassie, to soften the blow. "It's not fair to celebrate too much when she's feeling down," Lyra had said. So, we'd gathered in Vivian's beautifully appointed sunroom, all floral chintz and gleaming silver, a stark contrast to our own cozy, slightly worn cottage. Cassie had seemed subdued, offering Lyra a tight-lipped smile and a cursory "congrats." I'd put it down to understandable disappointment. Now, the memory of Cassie at Lyra's laptop, her head bent in concentration, her fingers flying across the keys, took on a sinister new light. The casual request to look up song lyrics felt like a flimsy stage curtain, barely concealing a far darker performance. Lyra, her hands trembling, opened her laptop. Her breath hitched. There, in the sent folder of her email program, was the withdrawal message, timestamped 3:17 p.m. on that Tuesday. Her browser history for that time slot showed a visit to the Kingswood University admissions portal, followed by a search for how to formally decline a scholarship offer. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. She knew my password, Lyra whispered, her voice hollow. Years ago, I told her we were sharing something online. I never changed it. I trusted her. Tears finally welled, spilling silently down her cheeks, each one a testament to a shattered innocence. She wasn't just grieving a lost scholarship. She was grieving a lost cousin, a lost friendship, a lost faith in the goodness she so readily extended to others. I wrapped my arms around her, rocking her gently as the sobs finally came, raw and heartbroken. My own heart ached with a ferocity that surprised me. It wasn't the hot flare of anger I might have expected, but a deep, cold sorrow. This wasn't just a youthful mistake, a moment of jealousy gone too far. This was a calculated act of sabotage, a theft not of money, but of a dream, of a future. And it had been perpetrated by family. "It's all right, my love," I murmured, though nothing felt all right. "We'll sort this. We'll find a way." But even as I spoke the words, a quiet resolve began to harden within me. This couldn't be swept under the rug. For Lyra's sake, for the sake of truth, this needed to be brought into the light. The decision to speak with Vivian was one I approached with a heavy heart, the kind of conversation you postpone, knowing it will irrevocably alter the landscape of your relationship. I drove to her house the next morning, the familiar streets of Port Blossom feeling alien, overshadowed by the weight of what I knew. Vivian lived in a newer part of town, her house larger than ours, with a meticulously manicured lawn and a glossy front door that always seemed to reflect a slightly more polished version of the world. She greeted me with her usual effusive charm, a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Alara, what a lovely surprise. Come in, come in. Coffee?" I declined, unable to pretend this was a casual visit. We stood in her airy, sun-filled kitchen, a space that suddenly felt oppressive. "Vivian," I began, my voice quieter than I intended, "something terrible has happened concerning Lyra's scholarship." I laid out the facts, calmly, carefully. The letter from Kingswood, the email sent from Lyra's account, the timestamp, Lyra's memory of Cassie using her laptop at the tea party, the evidence from the browser history. As I spoke, Vivian's expression shifted from polite concern to a kind of wary defensiveness. Her smile faltered, replaced by a slight frown that tightened the corners of her mouth. "Well," she said when I finished, her tone carefully neutral, "that's quite a story, Alara. Are you sure Lyra didn't just have second thoughts? It's a big step, moving away, all that pressure." The implication, so casually delivered, stung. "Vivian, Lyra has dreamed of this for years. She wouldn't just have second thoughts and then forget she'd sent an email. This was deliberate." Vivian sighed, turning to gaze out at her perfect garden, a picture of manufactured serenity. "Cassie has been heartbroken, you know. Absolutely devastated about not getting in. She's so sensitive, Alara. This whole scholarship business, it's been incredibly stressful for her." "I understand she's disappointed," I said, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. "But that doesn't explain or excuse what appears to have happened." An email was sent from Lyra's laptop, using Lyra's account, withdrawing her from a scholarship that Cassie was waitlisted for. "Can you see how that looks?" She turned back, a flicker of something hard in her eyes. "And what exactly are you implying, Alara? That my daughter, that Cassie, would do something so deceitful?" Her voice was laced with an indignation that felt rehearsed. "I'm not implying, Vivian. I'm stating what we've found. I came here hoping you could shed some light on it, perhaps speak to Cassie." "Cassie wouldn't do such a thing," Vivian insisted, her voice rising slightly. "She's a good girl. Perhaps Lyra is misremembering. Or maybe," she added, her gaze sharpening, "maybe Lyra felt guilty that she got it and Cassie didn't." Maybe, subconsciously, she wanted to give Cassie a chance. The sheer audacity of her suggestion left me momentarily speechless. To twist Lyra's inherent kindness into a motive for self-sabotage was a cruelty I hadn't anticipated, even from Vivian. I saw then the chasm between us, wider and deeper than I had ever allowed myself to acknowledge. She wasn't just defending her daughter, she was erecting a fortress of denial and, perhaps, complicity. Lyra is not to blame here, Vivian, I said, my voice firm now, the initial shock giving way to a cold clarity. Her future has been jeopardized. We have provided the university with the information we found. They are looking into it. Vivian's eyes narrowed. You went to the university before speaking to me? To your own sister. I came to you as soon as we understood what likely happened with Cassie and the laptop, I corrected gently. The university was contacted when Lyra received the letter, before we knew the details of how it happened. We simply want the truth, and for Lyra's scholarship to be reinstated. Well, I can assure you, Cassie had nothing to do with it, Vivian said, her arms crossing defensively. She's been beside herself with worry for Lyra, hoping it was all a mistake. The lie was so blatant, so poorly constructed, it was almost pitiful. I looked at my sister, at the carefully composed mask of concern, and felt a profound sadness settle over me. There would be no understanding here, no shared path to resolution. I hope you're right, Vivian, I said quietly. For everyone's sake. I left her standing in her sun-drenched kitchen, the scent of expensive lilies heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the simple honesty of our little cottage by the sea. Driving home, the gentle rhythm of the waves seemed to echo the turmoil in my heart. The conversation had yielded no comfort, only a deeper, more painful certainty. Lyra and I spent the next few days in a state of suspended animation, the initial shock giving way to a weary anxiety. We had meticulously documented everything, screenshots of the email, the browser history, Lyra's written account of the afternoon at Vivian's. We forwarded this to Ms. Albright at Kingswood University, hoping that the clear evidence of unauthorized access would compel them to act swiftly. Ms. Albright acknowledged receipt, assuring us that the matter was being taken very seriously and that an internal review was underway. But the wheels of bureaucracy, even in matters of such personal devastation, turn slowly. Each passing day felt like a grain of sand slipping through Lyra's fingers, her dream receding with the tide. The thought of involving the police was a heavy weight on my conscience. To bring such a formal, public accusation against my own niece, against Vivian's daughter, felt like a betrayal of family bonds, however frayed they had become. Lyra, too, recoiled from the idea. It just feels wrong, Mama, even after what she did. But as the days bled into a week with no definitive word from the university, a stark realization began to crystallize. This wasn't just a university matter, it was fraud. Identity theft. An act with real-world consequences beyond the loss of a scholarship. What lesson would Lyra learn if we allowed such a profound injustice to pass unchallenged, simply because it was perpetrated by family? That boundaries could be violated without consequence? That her future was less important than preserving a facade of family harmony? Sometimes, my love, I said to Lyra one evening, as we sat watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of bruised purple and fading gold, the hardest acts of love involve holding people accountable, even when it's family. Not for revenge, but for truth, and for your own self-respect. What Cassie did was not just unkind, it was unlawful. And your Aunt Vivian, her willingness to ignore it, to protect that falsehood, is a profound disappointment. Lyra listened, her gaze fixed on the horizon. So, what do we do? She asked, her voice small. I think, I said, taking a deep breath, we need to report it. Not to punish, but to ensure this is properly investigated, and to show that such actions have consequences. The decision sat heavily between us. The following morning, with a sense of trepidation that settled like a cold stone in my stomach, I contacted the Port Blossom Police Department and filed a formal report for digital impersonation and fraud. The officer who took my statement, a kind-faced woman named Sergeant Miller, listened patiently, her expression growing more serious as I detailed the events. She assured me they would investigate thoroughly. Leaving the station, I felt no triumph, only a deep, aching sadness. It felt like severing a limb to save a life, a necessary agony. The call came 2 days later. It was Vivian, her voice not sharp with rage, as I might have expected from the narrator of another story, but low and trembling with a wounded, manipulative fury. "Alara? The police were here. At my house. Questioning Cassie. How could you do this to your own niece, to our family?" "Vivian," I began, my voice calm despite the tremor in my own hands. "I spoke with you first. I hoped we could resolve this within the family, that you would encourage Cassie to tell the truth. You chose not to. She's just a child," Vivian cried, her voice cracking. "A sensitive girl who made a silly mistake out of jealousy. And you treat her like a criminal. Our parents are beside themselves. You've dragged our family name through the mud. Cassie is 17, Vivian, legally almost an adult. And this was not a silly mistake. It was a calculated act that could destroy Lyra's future. What I did was report a crime. The consequences are for Cassie, and perhaps for you, to face, based on your actions, not mine. You always were self-righteous, Alara," she spat, the veneer of wounded civility gone. "Always judging." "I am trying to protect my daughter," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "As you, perhaps, should have been trying to guide yours toward honesty." I ended the call, my heart heavy. The chasm had become a canyon. That evening, Lyra and I drove to my parents' house, a familiar Sunday ritual now laden with unspoken tension. I'd baked an apple crumble, Lyra's favorite. Its warm, cinnamon scent usually a comfort, now feeling like a fragile offering of peace in a time of war. Helena and Richard, my mother and father, greeted us with their customary hugs, but there was a palpable strain in the air. We sat around their polished mahogany dining table, the silence punctuated only by the clinking of cutlery as I served the crumble. "We heard about the situation," my father, Richard, began, his gaze fixed on his plate. Vivian called. "She's very distressed." "We are all distressed, Dad," I said gently. "Lyra most of all." My mother, Helena, sighed, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "Alara, dear, couldn't this have been handled more quietly? Involving the police, it's so drastic." "Mother," I said, trying to keep my voice even, a crime was committed. Lyra's scholarship, her future, was stolen from her by Cassie, using deception. Vivian has chosen to deny it. What other recourse did we have?" Lyra, who had been silent, looked at her grandparents, her eyes pleading for understanding. "Grandma, Grandpa, I just wanted my scholarship back. I worked so hard for it." "We know you did, dear," Helena said, her tone softening as she looked at Lyra. Then, she glanced at me, and a subtle shift occurred. "But Cassie, she's always been more fragile than you, Lyra. This has hit her very hard. She's not coping well." My father nodded. "Vivian says Cassie was just desperate. That she saw Lyra had so much talent, so many options, and Cassie felt like this was her only chance. She didn't mean to cause such harm." A cold dread seeped into my bones. "Are you saying you believe she did it then?" I asked. They exchanged a look, a silent, weighty communication that excluded Lyra and me. We've all talked," Richard admitted, his voice low. "Vivian, Cassie, your mother, and I. After you, well, after Vivian realized what you suspected." "And?" I prompted, my breath catching. "And we agreed," Helena said, her gaze unwavering now, fixed on me with a kind of sorrowful resolve, that perhaps it would be better if the scholarship stayed, well, closer to home. If Cassie could benefit. Lyra, you're so resilient, darling. You'll find another way. Cassie, she needs this more." The words hung in the air, stunning in their casual cruelty. Lyra gasped, a small, wounded sound. She pushed her chair back, her face ashen. You knew? You helped them keep it from me. No one helped anyone take anything, Lyra, Helena said, her voice sharpening with a hint of impatience. It was a family understanding. To prevent further upset. We didn't want this to become a public spectacle. A family understanding? I echoed, my voice dangerously quiet. The apple crumble sat untouched, its sweetness a bitter mockery. You understood that one grandchild had deliberately sabotaged the other, and you decided to condone it? To protect the perpetrator at the expense of the victim, all under the guise of family harmony. Don't use that tone with me, Alara, my father said, his own voice rising. We were trying to protect the family from a scandal. And then you went and called the police. What did you expect? I expected, I said, standing slowly, Lyra already by my side, her small hand finding mine, my parents to stand for what is right. Not for what is convenient, or what keeps the peace at the cost of justice. We left the crumble on the table, a symbol of a sweetness that could no longer be shared. The drive home was silent, filled only with Lyra's quiet sniffles and the roar of my own disillusionment. That night, I didn't dramatically block their numbers. Instead, I wrote a short, carefully worded email to my parents and to Vivian. Dearest family, I wrote. The events of the past weeks have been deeply painful. Lyra was the victim of a malicious act, and instead of finding support and a commitment to truth from her closest relatives, we have found complicity and a willingness to sacrifice her well-being for a distorted idea of family unity. We need space to heal from this profound betrayal. We cannot continue to engage as if nothing has happened. We will be taking time apart. We hope one day you will understand the depth of the hurt you have caused. Alara and Lyra. Lyra, with a quiet dignity that made my heart ache with pride, logged into the extended family's online messaging group. She uploaded the screenshots of the withdrawal email, the browser history, and a brief, factual account of what had transpired. This is what happened to my scholarship, she typed. Cassie sent the email from my laptop during Aunt Vivian's tea. Our grandparents became aware and chose to support covering it up. This is the truth. You can believe what you wish. She didn't wait for the inevitable storm of replies. She simply logged out. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was our silence, a space we were carving out for ourselves, free from the suffocating expectations and betrayals of those we had once trusted implicitly. The weeks that followed were a blur of waiting and quiet resilience. Kingswood University's internal investigation proceeded with painstaking thoroughness. Lyra was interviewed twice more, her calm, factual recounting of events impressing the panel, according to Ms. Albright, who had become a surprisingly supportive, if formal, ally. The police investigation also moved forward, though Sergeant Miller cautioned us that such cases could be complex. The start of term at Kingswood was looming, a date that had once shone with promise now casting a long shadow of uncertainty. We had no scholarship, no alternative funding plan. The dream seemed to be dissolving like sea mist. It's not even just about the money anymore, Mama, Lyra said one evening, her voice tinged with a weariness that belied her youth. We were sitting on our small porch, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance in the twilight. It's that they looked at me, at my dream, and decided it wasn't worth protecting. That I wasn't worth protecting. Her words were a quiet echo of the truth, a truth that had settled deep in my own bones. How do you mend a heart broken not by strangers, but by those who were supposed to be its staunchest guardians? Then a small, unexpected light appeared. My mother's cousin, Great Aunt Millie, a woman known for her sharp wit and even sharper sense of justice, lived several states away. We hadn't spoken in years, but she was part of the extended family group where Lyra had posted her message. A few days after Lyra's post, I received a brief, handwritten note from her. Alara, my dear, I read Lyra's message. My heart aches for you both. What a terrible business. I've taken the liberty of forwarding her story, along with my own commendation of her character, to an old friend of mine who sits on the board of the Pinewood Education Trust. No promises, but one must always try to steer the ship towards a fair wind. With love, Millie. I hadn't dared to hope. But a week later, just 5 days before orientation at Kingswood, my phone rang. Ms. Alara Thorne? This is Alistair Finch from the Pinewood Education Trust. We received information regarding your daughter, Lyra Thorne, and the unfortunate circumstances surrounding her scholarship at Kingswood University. We've reviewed her academic record and the details of her situation. The Trust has a discretionary fund for exceptional students facing undue hardship. We would be honored to offer Lyra a full sponsorship, covering tuition and living expenses for the duration of her undergraduate studies at Kingswood. I sank into a chair, the receiver clutched in my hand, tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed finally streaming down my face. "She's in," I whispered, needing to hear it again. "She's in," Mr. Finch confirmed, his voice warm with kindness. When I told Lyra, she simply stared at me, her eyes wide, before dissolving into tears of her own, tears of relief, of disbelief, of a hope so fiercely battered, now astonishingly reborn. "We did it, Mama," she choked out through her sobs. "No, my darling," I said, holding her close, my own tears dampening her hair. "You did. Your integrity, your strength, your truth, they shone through, even in the darkness." The legal proceedings took their course. The evidence against Cassie was irrefutable. Faced with the prospect of a formal court case, and perhaps with some belated, inadequate stirring of conscience under pressure from her own legal counsel, Cassie admitted to sending the email. She claimed it was a moment of madness, fueled by jealousy and Vivian's constant pressure to succeed. The university, upon receiving the official police report and Cassie's confession, formally expelled her from their waitlist and barred her from any future applications to Kingswood. She received a formal caution from the police, mandatory counseling, and a significant number of community service hours, cleaning graffiti from the walls of the Port Blossom Community Center. Vivian, too, faced consequences. While not criminally charged due to lack of direct evidence of her instructing Cassie in the act, her complicity and subsequent attempts to cover up the truth became widely known within our extended family and small community. The social fallout was considerable. The carefully constructed facade of her perfect life began to crumble. She and my parents attempted several overtures, tearful phone calls, letters filled with justifications and pleas for understanding. We listened, Lyra and I, with a newfound, sad wisdom. We acknowledged their words, but offered no easy absolution. Forgiveness, we were learning, was a quiet, internal process, not a performance for the benefit of others. It would come, perhaps, in its own time, but trust was a far more delicate bloom, easily crushed and slow to regrow. Lyra's original Chancellor's Beacon Award was never reinstated. It had, as Ms. Albright had warned, been irrevocably reassigned. But the Pinewood Trust sponsorship felt like something more, something earned not just through academic merit, but through an ordeal that had tested her spirit to its core and found it unbreakable. The morning Lyra left for Kingswood was bright and clear, the sea a calm expanse of sapphire. As she stood by the door, her bags packed, a new, quiet confidence in her eyes, she turned to me. "I really thought they'd broken a part of me, Mama. That part that believed in, well, in things." I looked at my daughter, no longer just my quiet, artistic girl, but a young woman forged in a fire she hadn't sought, emerging not hardened, but tempered, imbued with a gentle strength that was profoundly her own. "And now?" I asked softly. A small smile touched her lips. "Now, I think they just showed me how strong that part really is." Months have passed. Lyra is thriving at Kingswood. She sends me long, thoughtful emails filled with her discoveries in history and literature, descriptions of the ancient oaks on campus, and the friends she's making, friends drawn to her quiet intelligence and genuine kindness. She joined the university's literary journal and even tutors younger students in essay writing, her empathy making her a patient and insightful guide. Here in Port Blossom, the tides continue their timeless rhythm. I still paint, my watercolors perhaps imbued with a new depth, a more nuanced understanding of light and shadow. The silence from Vivian and my parents is no longer a painful void, but a space I have learned to inhabit with a certain peace. Occasionally, a card arrives, a birthday, a holiday, with tentative, hopeful messages. I read them, acknowledge them with a polite, brief note, and continue to tend my own garden, both literal and metaphorical. The path to reconciliation is long, and perhaps some bridges, once burned with such carelessness, can never be fully rebuilt to bear the weight of what was. But what I've learned, and what I see blossoming in Lyra, is that true strength isn't about the absence of wounds, but about the courage to heal, to set healthy boundaries, and to continue to seek the light, even when surrounded by shadows. The family we are born into is a matter of chance. The family we build through love, respect, and unwavering integrity, that is a choice, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. And in that choice, Lyra and I have found our own quiet, resilient peace. The cracks, we've discovered, do indeed let the light in, illuminating paths we never knew existed.